Long before anybody called me Dr. Graceffo, and even before I was the Brooklyn monk, I was the son of Giuseppe. My father was a master electrician and an electrical contractor. He owned his own business and he worked very hard every day. He used to take me to work with him in the summers and during school holidays. Now on the bill, he used to charge the clients for me at the helper rate, which at the time was $5 an hour. I think minimum wage was $3.15 an hour, and my dad charged $5 an hour for my work. Now, he didn't give me that money. He felt that going to work every day was a lesson in itself, in fact a reward, and he didn't feel I needed money on top of that. But the point of the story was, I knew that I was billing at a rate of $5 an hour. So as a young kid, 14, 15, 16 years old, I went, wow, this is great. It's much more than minimum wage. One summer, the whole summer, my dad and I were doing one huge project, and it was, we were rewiring a factory. And we'd come in the morning, and my dad would pull out his notebook, and he'd start doing some calculations and planning, and the conduit, and the amperage, and the whatever it was. I don't know anything about electricity. I just worked for my dad. And he would turn to me, and he would say, do you know how to set up the amperage? And I would say, no. And he would say, do you know how to set up the voltage? I'd say, no. And he'd say, do you know how to plan the bends and the conduit or estimate the amount of wire that we need for this job? I said, no. And he said, well, that's the brain work that's involved here. He goes, but there's also some brawn work. For example, we got to cut a hole in that wall. He goes, now which one of us do you think should do the brain work and which one should do the brawn work? So next thing I know, I got a sledgehammer and I'm breaking a hole in a wall. And every day when we went to work, that's what happened. I was the one who had to knock holes in the walls. I was the one who had to cut the pipes. My dad had to plan the bends, because the bends are actually quite involved to plan, but then I was the one who had to cut them. I was the one who had to take the masonry drill and drill holes in the walls and tap in the anchors so that my dad could attach the conduits. And then when it came time to run the wires, my dad would stand at the other end feeding the wires, and I was one at the end who had to pull the wires. And it was physically very, 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 very demanding, and a lot of times we were up on ladders and, in the heat, and especially in a factory, you figure it's a big, tall building, there's no air conditioning, and you're up in the top where all the heat is collecting. It was dead, middle of summer, and I was just sweating, and it was just horrible. And we were up on the ladder, we were pulling these wires, and my dad goes, stop for a minute. He goes, I want you to look down at the factory floor. And this was a factory that made, that wound wire armatures that go inside of motors. So basically, these people, the factory workers, their job was that there would be a spindle, and it was turning. And they had to wind wire onto this spindle all day, every day. And I guess maybe they had to do so many feet or so many meters of this wire, and it had to be laid just perfectly. And they had to put their thumb on there to guide the wire, and this thing was spinning. And every one of them, I remember when we were eating lunch, they take their gloves off. They all had these burns and rips and tears in their skin, and a lot of them were missing fingernails and maybe parts of their finger, and they were just had their attention and their eyes on this thing, and they're pressing it with their thumbs all day, every day, and every one of them wore glasses. And my dad said to me, he goes, people who have this job, they all go blind eventually, because it's just too much detail, too much attention. And meanwhile, it was just the most boring, horrible job in the world. They just stood there with their thumb on this thing, and it's spinning like this for a whole day. So my dad said to me, he goes, how much education do you think you need to work on the floor of this factory? And I actually asked some of the factory workers. I've been talking to them and asked them if they graduated high school. Most of them hadn't. So I said, well, you don't have to have a high school diploma. My dad goes, right. He said, so if you don't have a high school diploma, this is what you're going to do. You're going to stand in front of this machine with this thing spinning with your thumb in there all day, every day for 35 years. He goes, does that sound like the life that you want? I said, no, not at all. And he goes, I'll tell you something else. He goes, they're getting paid minimum wage. Because you're 14 and you're already earning more than they are. I said, wow. So then there was a guy that walked around the factory, and he was kind of a foreman with a clipboard. And I remember he was a bodybuilder, and at that time I just started sort of lifting weights. I've been doing martial arts for a few years, but I just started lifting weights, and I was really interested in knowing about bodybuilding, and so I probably idolized this guy a bit. I was 14, and he was probably like 22, 23, so I probably looked up to him, whatever. And my dad says to me, you see the foreman? He goes, how much money do you think he makes? And I said, I don't know. My dad says he makes $7.50 an hour. And my dad, we'd owned various restaurants and businesses before, and so my dad was always very open with us and in the family about what things cost and how much was the house payment, how much was rent on the shop, how much was raw materials, whatever. And so I remember thinking at the time, geez, I'm a kid and I'm getting $5 an hour. This guy's getting $7.50 an hour, but then he's married and he's got children. And wow, that he must be poor. He must just be horribly poor. During that summer, we were very busy with this one client with the factory, but my dad couldn't let his business completely collapse, so he couldn't turn away all the other customers who called. So we were working this factory all day, and then at night we were going and doing the other electrical work at people's homes. So I remember we went to this one home. They had a beautiful swimming pool. They had a gate. I remember they had an electronic gate, and this was back in the very early 80s. This is a big deal, electronic gate. And we went in their house, and they had 2 VCR machines, 2 Betamax VCR machines, and I was just blown away. I didn't know there was such a thing as a human being that could afford 2 Betamax machines. And the house was beautiful, and the cars were beautiful. And my dad said to me, he goes, this guy is a doctor. He goes, how much money do you think doctors make? And I didn't know. And he said, well, at that time, and keep in mind, it's like 1981, 82, he goes, $50,000 a year. And I just thought, man, how could anybody spend $50,000 a year? Because if I was getting $5 an hour, and that was $10,000 a year, and this guy's getting $50,000, he was getting 5 times what I was getting. And then my dad said to me, how much education do you think you need to be a doctor? And so we looked it up, and I found out, well, you have a bachelor's degree, maybe a master's, 3, 4, 5 years of medical school on top of that. It's about 10 years of training. And that was it. My dad would then, every time we dealt with any kind of professional, the guy came to do my dad's taxes for his business. My dad said to me, what do you think an accountant makes? And we found out they made whatever they made at that time, $35,000, $40,000 a year. And how much education does that take? Oh, it takes about 5 years with, to pass the CPA exam and all that. And that was it. That's how my dad taught me the value of education. He put it in dollar terms. And because I was working, it made sense to me. I knew what my labor was worth, and I also knew, even at age 14, I didn't want to be cutting holes in walls for the rest of my life. And that's how my dad motivated me. Giuseppe didn't have any formal education, but he knew the value of $1, and he translated that to the value of education. And today, I got a PhD.